Hi, this is Jordan Ramirez, the host of the podcast Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez and the Minisodes Jordan Ramirez Recommends. And before I get started with today's episode, I wanted to share with you some information about what happened with me and how I'm going to be taking care of myself from now on. So, on Saturday night and early Sunday morning last week, I had AFib and irregular heart conditions. Because of this, it resulted in me going to the hospital. My family was there in support of me, and I am so grateful to the hospital staff who helped me to make me feel better. It was triggered when I was watching this film that I will be discussing on my podcast a little bit later. And this will be my last episode of the season. It doesn't mean that my show will be over, though. It's just that my show will be going on hiatus, and I'm just going to make some changes to the format, as well as on my website. In the meantime, during the summer break, I will still be doing the minisodes just after my appointments and what I'm going to do next, so that this incident will not happen again. I'm not here to say that I'm going to exploit this recent incident because of this film. What I will say is that after watching this film, I believe that it was a trigger that led me to go to the hospital. And this review is just going to be my honest take on it. I want to thank my family, my friends, and everyone whom I knew for thinking about me and wishing that I get better and that I will make it all the way through. So the next steps for me will depend on what goes on in my appointment and what I have to do regarding for my work. I will keep you updated on what is going on regarding my health. So without further ado, you are listening to a Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez Minisode. It is the fantasy horror film Unicorn Wars from 2023, directed by Alberto Vasquez, starring John Guairi, Wynonna Sosti, and Ramon Berea. It is a holy war between the unicorns and the teddy bears to see who will be the dominant animal species in God's land. In the backdrop of this holy war are two brothers, Bluey, played by John Guairi, and Tubby, played by Wynonna Sosti. They have been at odds with each other since they were born. As the war rages on, so does the mental instability of Bluey's mindset that has driven him to the precipice of madness. Now, regarding this film, I'm not going to say that I praise it, but instead I will comment what the film addressed from a storytelling perspective. The film is not an attempt to glorify violence or fascism, but is instead made to be an anti-war picture by using anthropomorphic animals coupled with a military fascist government that has indoctrinated their own citizens on the war between the teddy bears and the unicorns. While on the surface, the teddy bears are shown to be cute and adorable from their saturated candy-colored palette to showcase a bright and colorful world, but underneath their exterior, they are violent, foul-mouthed, narcissistic, envious, and become emotionally unstable. The unicorns, on the other hand, are mostly shown in black silhouette to give them a mysterious appearance, and are an inverted take on the traditional view of the unicorns often seen in pop culture and Christianity. They are mostly portrayed as wild animals attuned with nature and are mostly female, while the teddy bears are mostly male. The film's themes include military fascism, religious fanaticism, and the dehumanization of war. The teddy bears live in a society that is controlled by their military fascist government. They control what type of information they receive as fact and indoctrinate their own citizens to be perceived as what is false. In the early beginning of the film, when the teddy bears are at boot camp, the head military general makes the point that the group of teddy bears that are terrible sets out the goal of what they are trying to do, by turning them into false idols for their own citizens to look up to. It is that type of sentiment that is often found in authoritarian or fascist countries that set out to make an example of their own soldiers to convey a narrative that only the military generals and their government can control. In terms of the religious fanaticism covered in this film, the teddy bears are presented with their own version of the Bible that features a violent and vengeful God. In the text, the teddy bears were presented as being part of God's land when the animals were created in the earth, and that once the bears gained knowledge from the power of God, they started to have their own morals, ethics, and laws, once they have gained God's wisdom and knowledge. But they were later driven out of the forest by the unicorns, who are portrayed in the teddy bear's Bible as the demonic other. Once Bluey starts to engulf himself more and more into this book that was given to him by the priest, he starts to believe that everything that the book says to become fact instead of fiction. He also starts to believe that he will be the chosen one once he decides to follow the mission in this holy book of obliterating the unicorns, and the teddy bears will be rightfully welcomed into God's domain once again. It is also a radical and unique take on the famous Cain and Abel story from the Bible, but with the teddy bears replacing the biblical characters. Bluey is someone who is jealous because he wants to be seen as the first instead of being the second. He is driven out of jealousy and rage, or envy and rage, that is further superseded during the trip to the jungle to recover the last troop that went missing. He is also corrupted by this Bible that the priest hands out to him and believes in the text that he becomes mentally unstable. He is also very violent when it comes to seeking revenge on his own enemies. Tubby in the film is the exact opposite. He is the only sympathetic character in the film that I root for, even though he is unlucky when he was in boot camp. He becomes the subject of humiliation for his physical appearance or fat shaming, and he is sympathetic towards his own colleagues, nature, and the animals later in the story. He is the only character, in my opinion, who is not corrupted, narcissistic, jealous, violent, and fanatical. And now when it comes to the dehumanization of the war, you often think of films such as Platoon, or maybe Apocalypse Now, or maybe something like, any other anti-war film that makes a statement about what war can do to a man. But in this film, it's very violent, it shows a lot of gore, and it has statements about what war can do, even in a fantasy society like the Teddy Bears, of course. So if you want someone to describe this film, I would paraphrase from the director when he described it as Bambi meets Apocalypse Now, plus the Bible added into it as well. While the film is very heavy on its content, it also contains surreal and disturbingly frightening elements that makes it an uncomfortable movie for everyone to watch. With that said, while I usually recommend films that I find very interesting and hoping to renew interest for those who have never seen it, this time it's more of a choice of whether the listeners would want to see this film or skip it. If you do want to watch this film, be forewarned that this film does contain violent content, heavy subject matter, nudity, and disturbing elements that is upsetting or graphic. If you do not want to watch this film, then don't see it. Because of its heavy subject matter that may upset people or go against your beliefs or are vulnerable to violent or disturbing content, then you have the option to skip this film. The film overall is an interesting take on combating against fascism and religious fanaticism while mixing the violent and disturbing content on the atrocities of war and what it can do mentally to the mindset to the utmost extremes. Vasquez, with his storytelling and direction, set out to make a horror film in 2022 and succeeded. This has been a Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez minisode. Tune into the minisodes every Monday at 12 p.m. on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Radio Public. Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez will return for the next season in the fall. My upcoming minisode will be coming soon, along with the new changes coming to the podcast and the website. If you are on Spotify, make sure to like and subscribe to keep this show going, and make sure to recommend to your friends and family members to tune into this podcast. I also have my own YouTube channel, Film Talk with Jordan Ramirez, where you can watch my video podcasts and make sure to like and subscribe. And until then, I'll see you at the movies.